Welcome everybody to this edition. Actually, it's the first edition of I Learned About Maintenance Human Factors from that. And I'm delighted to be joined by Scott Rexwinkle from California, somewhere a little bit warmer than where I am in sunny Norwich in the UK. Scott, why don't you just give us a quick introduction about yourself and why you're interested in human factors?
Yeah, my name's Scott Rexwinkle. I am a FAA airframe and power plant mechanic with inspection authorization. I'm also a private pilot, and I have a master's degree in aeronautics and aviation aerospace safety. I guess my human factors interest wasn't generated for me until I started in my current job, which is aviation accident investigation and reconstruction. And as an A&P going through A&P school, we never touched base on human factors in aviation maintenance. And it really wasn't brought to my attention until I started investigating accidents and got into my master's program, where it was a very heavy focus, actually. And so that, to me, was very interesting, that as a new mechanic, coming into this field, that those topics didn't really ever get addressed. And that really surprised me as I went on in my career and learned more and more about human factors. Why isn't this being brought to the attention of the new A&B? And so that's what spurred my interest in human factors.
That's great. Thanks, Scott. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, I've been in a similar situation, still am to some degree, of thinking, over here in Europe, you know, we have to do human factors continuation training once every 2 years. But I know myself, and I'm sure you'd agree, you know, human factors are affecting me every single day. Have I just had an argument at home and now I'm driving to work? Or is there something else? Is there financial worry that I've got going on in the back of my mind? How's that influencing my actions and my thoughts that day while I'm at work? And what's the impact of those actions or thoughts in possibly a negative context? So I think you're absolutely right. It's so important to discuss human factors, and especially bringing it into our world of aircraft maintenance. So we're going to dive straight into this accident that took place a few years ago in 2015. So on the screen, I'm just going to share with you a news article that came out at the time. And you'll see that pop up on your screen any moment now. So there you go. This is just to set the scene, really, of this particular accident. And Scott, just to go through some of the, you know, a bit of an introduction to what the events of what happened back in 2015. So in 2015, there was a PA-46-350P Malibu Mirage that had gone in for some maintenance at Rocket Engineering. And by the way, if you're interested in finding out more information about this, we're going to post the links to the various NTSB reports below this video. So you'll be able to, you know, find out more if you wish and read into it a bit more. But today we're going to focus on the human factor element that we're pulling out. So the aircraft was just coming out of maintenance at Rocket Engineering. There was a pilot who was a former test pilot, and he worked for the company and would often fly the aircraft after maintenance just to check it, make sure everything's good to go. Also, he'd fly with the customer as well for familiarization flights. So he's pretty well known and very competent for all intents and purposes. On this particular day, the aircraft had finished being in maintenance, and the pilot was accompanied by a customer service and sales representative, just as a second pair of eyes. It was the end of the busy day, and the event rolls out that, you know, the pilot took off, and as soon as they got into the air, the aircraft began to roll to the right. And what else did you pick up from that, Scott, from what the report was saying about after the aircraft took off, you know, it began to turn to the right? What else happened in that next phase of flight?
You know, I also found it interesting that after he took off, you know, not only was the pilot on board, but the person, the sales rep that was flying with him was also pilot rated. So you had that second set of eyes, but also that second set of eyes that was from a pilot's standpoint or pilot's point of view, which I thought is a great thing to have on board, especially during a maintenance check flight. The controllability issues, I know that the pilot reported that he had a heavy right roll, I think it was.
Yeah.
But never really got to the point where he was able to diagnose in flight the situation and what the cause of his heavy right roll was. And at that point, his focus into really, and rightfully so, was back on getting that airplane back on the ground. You can imagine the challenging situation you'd be in at that point in time, where you had a control issue, commanding an uncontrollable roll or very difficult to control roll, and trying to evaluate that situation at a very low altitude.
Yeah.
It's a very challenging event.
Yeah. And he lost, I think, as soon as he took off, he managed to maintain partial control, but after losing 700 feet of altitude, managed to get it away from the airfield, I guess, to try and do some troubleshooting. Had some kind of control back. He was able to then bring it back on final approach, and then just before landing, unfortunately, he rolled it. The aircraft rolled and crashed into the adjacent Spokane River, which was a very, very sad set of circumstances, a sad tragedy that happened. But I think from what fascinated me about this particular accident, and there's many out there that unfortunately we can probably draw similar conclusions to, is what happened from a maintenance perspective. And that's what I really want to dive in with you now, Scott, because I think anybody watching this is going to think, that's from the pilot side. And both of us can relate to the pilot side because we're both pilots. And so we're seeing it from that viewpoint. But actually, if we now look at it from a maintenance perspective, there's so much that we can begin to pull out. And I think, before we came on this show, Scott, we were chatting about hindsight bias and the fact that we now know the outcome. So right from the outset, I think I'd like to just establish that anything we say is purely our thoughts, not necessarily representative of any company that we might work for. And what we're saying really is things that we've tried to dissect and apply ourselves. And we're doing all this from the place of, what can we learn from a human factor perspective so that we might be better armed in the future if we ever find ourselves experiencing similar human factors.
Absolutely. Yes.
So what did happen from a maintenance perspective? This is what we know. And Scott, feel free just to jump in. So had recent maintenance at Rocket Engineering. It was just routine maintenance, but they did replace 4 aileron cables in the wings. 2 were the cable controls or control cables, and also 2 of the balance cables as well between the 2. So the main maintenance facility was the people carrying out the work. The report goes into a bit more detail and says that actually there was an outside avionics company who was also involved. And the organization, that particular organization, the outside organization, stated that the owner made multiple requests to add additional items to the work scope. So what's that beginning to tell you at the moment about the workload that's going on there, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this situation where you have an aircraft that comes in for sort of a routine maintenance event, inspection, I think in this case it was just an annual inspection, and you start to accumulate and find issues with the aircraft, right, that need to be rectified. So you're not only going through your normal routine, your normal replacement of components and parts and rectifying the squawks that you found during your inspection, you also have an outside entity that's also within that same space with you. And they're trying to accomplish their tasks, which keep getting added onto. You're trying to accomplish your tasks, which keep getting added onto as you're doing your inspection. And that can cause somewhat of a conflict, especially when you are trying to, say, route cables, new control cables, and you've got another avionics guy sitting in your cockpit, crawling underneath the panel, doing what he needs to do, or crawling through the back. And it may make you have to pause and leave something half done to move out of the way of the other person and then come back and revisit it, which can be dangerous if you're doing something like that, because you may lose track of where you were, what you had already accomplished. And so that is, I guess, just kind of the tip of the iceberg here of a cascading event that was set in motion. So when you have an owner or a customer that's also continually changing their mind, adding things on as you go, if you have a sort of deadline set where you have an expectation of the completion of the aircraft, and the owner has a deadline set in his mind and a completion date for that aircraft, and all of a sudden the owner continues to add more and more stuff, that adds to your pressure and to your stress, because all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, okay, I've just had 5 more items on a wish list dumped in my lap, but my time frame has remained the same. How can I get this done? And you feel that pressure and that stress to get this job done in the same amount of time and meet your deadline for that customer. And so you're, like I said earlier, you're getting this cascading set of events that's just starting right now, and it's kind of all being dumped on at once.
Yeah, and I think that's another important thing here to do is, to consider, how do we manage distractions on a day-to-day basis? Yeah. I think we're all distracted, or a lot of people are distracted so easily by their phones.
And not only that, they then lose track of what their thought was and what they were saying, and so the conversation kind of dies. But I think you run into the situation here where you have an owner that's calling on what seems to be pretty frequent basis, requesting additional items or for status updates on the inspection and the process of the airplane. But when you have that, it can be a great distraction, even though the mechanic in the situation stated that he didn't feel a particular pressure from the owner. I think it's pretty well implied here, because he did state that at some point he passed the owner off to the sales representative because he thought the sales representative could be a little more diplomatic. And he said diplomatic with the owner. So that to me implies, well, you were having some difficulty with this particular owner, and either with their frequency of contacting you or with the requests that were being made, or the deadline that was being pushed, and you decided that you needed to have somebody else take that workload off of you and be a little bit more diplomatic and handle the expectations possibly of that owner.
Yeah, and that's great, because I think, that's something the mechanic did that was actually a good way of coping with the distractions. So after that, the mechanic stated that he worked exclusively on this particular aircraft in the weeks leading up to the accident. He also reported to have replaced aileron balance and drive cables to both the left and the right ailerons. And he also reported replacing the cables in accordance with procedure outlined in the maintenance manual, and that he removed them one at a time to prevent inadvertent misrouting. And, that is good practice. Unfortunately, in this accident, it seems like that didn't happen. The maintenance manual provides a caution note as well. And this particular maintenance manual, the caution note was there to verify free and correct movement of ailerons. And then it goes on to mention, and this is what I thought was fascinating about this caution note, goes on to mention that often this check is frequently misinterpreted or just not performed.
I think that the misinterpretation is, and I may be wrong here, but as a mechanic, and to say you're not a pilot, right? But you should still understand the operation and the function and how control surfaces move for the desired movement of the aircraft. I know that the mechanic claimed that he checked and verified, and that he went and checked in the cockpit, and he also checked externally at the aileron itself. And from a mechanic standpoint, he may have very well done turn the yoke, look, it's pointing up. But then when he was external on the outside of the airplane, checking the rigging and the travels, he may have moved the aileron up, looked in the cockpit, saw the yoke move the correct direction. But the fact of the matter is, if I'm sitting outside of a Piper and I do that on the left aileron, I look over, I can't see the right-hand aileron. Because it's blocked by the fuselage. So that red flag right there, where he had maybe moved the left-hand aileron up, and he could have looked over and seen the right-hand aileron was also up. That would have, it was kind of blocked by a fuselage. So I think there's some unique set of circumstances here that kind of led to the, I guess, false sense of security that his inspection and verification of the travels were indeed correct. I think it's just the characteristics of the aircraft itself that kind of maybe it may have led to his inability to correctly verify, I would say.
Yeah. Mechanic also stated that there was no unusual rush or pressure to get the aircraft finished that day. However, as we stated earlier, the owner of the aircraft was flying in commercially from a different part of the country. So there's going to be a little bit of pressure, whether you perceive or you don't perceive it. There is going to be some pressure there. And I think, you know, the accident pilot had an appointment with the FAA medical examiner the following day. So this was end of the business day, busy business day. On the Friday, the pilot who was going to do the flying now to check everything over doesn't work Fridays and also has a medical examination. So, and the pilot's flying in commercially, the one who owns the aircraft. So there's something going on here. There's a lot of dynamics going on that I'm sure most of us can recognize probably as well.
Yeah, stacks of pressure that are coming in all of a sudden, for sure.
So just looking at what happens next. So the after the maintenance carried out, the NTSB report stated that there was no formal procedure requiring the work performed by the mechanic to be inspected. Yep. So the mechanic had done the work. There was no formal procedure requiring that work to be independently inspected, which was a really interesting point.
Yeah, that happens here in the United States because the way that the FAA structures inspection requirements with Part 91, which is our general aviation, which is the category this aircraft was being operated under. When we go complete a maintenance task, there's no requirement for that maintenance task to then be verified or inspected by a second party or second person. The same person completing the task can sign off the task.
Yeah,
that's not the same for our Part 135 operations or our commercial operations, but in general aviation, that is how it is handled. Is that a potential area of I guess danger when it comes to maintenance tasks? I think it is, but I think that a majority of facilities and the facilities that I have worked at in the past have always had this kind of, I guess, unwritten rule where when you complete a task, you go request another mechanic to come and be your second set of eyes to look at your task. Because this is a problem with it. This guy has been working on this plane for I think a week and a half or 2 weeks straight at this point. He kind of gets this tunnel vision or these blinders on. And while you may think you had completed a task, or, there's always that, I missed safety wire in that. Or there's always something, it seems like it's always great to have that second set of eyes, whether it's required or not, just to look over your work and verify it.
So I think, just wrapping up this, what went wrong here from a maintenance perspective, the report went on to say that the mechanic who'd installed the cables, it says that he'd actually asked the other mechanic who was helping him to reinspect, but the second guy said, no, that wasn't what I was asked to do. I think what's really important here, I just made a note about, communication and assumptions.
Yeah, it's so important to have that clarity of communication of not only the expectation of what you're asking to be done, but the confirmation that what was requested was actually done. Yeah. And in the situation, it seems like it wasn't done. The lead mechanic or the mechanic that had actually made the cable replacement says that he requested that this other mechanic come as a second set of eyes and to inspect his work and confirm that it was correct. Well, the second mechanic that came in says, well, I looked at it, I checked it for security and it was safety and everything was connected correctly. I never checked that they were operational in the correct direction, right? You never verified that. Well, mechanic number one, I think, assumed that when he asked for him to come look at the work, that he assumed he was checking it for control continuity, that it was correct, that the travels were in the right direction. And so there's, like you said, the failure of communication of exactly what was expected and the confirmation that what was expected was done. And that's where the ball was dropped in the sense of communication itself in this instance.
We always end with what 3 things we can take away from this. So I'd listed down 3 things, Scott, that I think, would be great to just takeaways from this that we can consider as we leave this video: distractions, time pressure, communication.
Absolutely. I think all three of those played a major role in this accident. And we had discussed earlier before we came on. I think that this accident had so many different layers to it, where in any of these layers had something been caught, this thing would have happened. Had the mechanic either not had the pressure or not been distracted, or had the second mechanic caught the rigging issue, or had the pilot caught it during the pre-flight, or we had so many different opportunities presented to rectify or catch and rectify the incorrect rigging. But like we're saying, it's one of those things where accidents occur because everything lines up, and it's just kind of. But what our job is, in human factors especially, is to try and alter just one. There's one thing that needs to be altered within that day or within that work experience on that aircraft to change the outcome and to catch that. And what's really great is that if at any one of those points in time that this thing is caught and is not an accident, we may not be learning about it or using it for our reference to learn, right? Yeah. But within that facility itself, if they catch it, they can learn from it. So if we're a little more diligent with our human factors and implementing it correctly and doing our self-assessments, and we are able to capture these potential accidents before something happens, they become great learning experiences, because then we can have that hindsight, right? Where we don't necessarily know what the outcome would have been. We know what it could have been, though. And then we can look back at it in the same fashion that we're looking at this accident now and learn from it.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's where proactive reporting comes in, and actually saying, I nearly did this, or I recognize that I'm under this, the influence of this human factor. And thankfully I'm aware of that. And it's making me more, focused on my task. If I hadn't have been, I'm sure we've probably all got some of those moments of kind of got away with that one. Three things then. So, we talked about distraction, minimizing distractions, just really, really basic stuff. And this is very quick rather than in depth. But if you're distracted by your phone, switch it off, put it on do not disturb. If you're involved in a critical task or you're doing a critical inspection, use a don't disturb sign, which I need to take and put it on my office door, actually, with my kiddies. Be mindful of anything else that may be going on in your life right now that might distract you. I think that's really important. Manage pressure by looking to manage your time, clarify your assumptions and expectations that your managers or your customers might have. And there's a lot to unpack around those. This is just three things to take away. Communicate well is the third thing. So take time to clearly communicate. Ask yourself if there's anything that you've said, or you've written down that assumes the other person knows as much as you about what you've just written down. So I often, if I'm writing something down or sending a text or an email, I'll reread it and try and put myself in somebody's shoes who hasn't got a clue with all the background information. This is them looking at it, fresh set of eyes. Now, how's it coming across? And provide time to clarify what you're communicating if needed, especially with safety critical tasks, or if you feel influenced by other human factors as well. It's just really important to take that extra bit of time. Scott, any last words?
No, this is great. I'm really hoping we can do this again. I really enjoy these case studies and looking at these and really evaluating them and hoping to learn something from them and hopefully spread some knowledge to some other people about these issues.
Great. Thanks, Scott. It's been great having you on, and everybody out there, remember your personal minimums. I've got my little card here, personal minimums card. Personal minimums can really just capture the potential for error creeping in, and actually just give you those few seconds that you need to think, that was close, or I need to just change the way I'm working here. So thanks again, Scott. Pleasure to have you on, and look forward to chatting again soon.